I'm Rachel Walker, 30 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the shadow in my own family. No matter what I did, I was always the one they dismissed, the one who didn't measure up. Growing up, Grandma Helen was the only one who believed in me. My Aunt Margaret, she made sure everyone else saw me as nothing. My cousins Daniel and Melissa became the family's golden children, perfect grades, perfect jobs, while I was branded the failure. But the day of Grandma's funeral, everything shifted. Margaret didn't just sneer in private anymore. She stood in front of everyone and spat the words she'd been saving for years. "You'll die a nobody." And for the first time I realized she wasn't going to stop until I was erased completely. Ever been told you'll never be enough? Hit like if someone in your family ever tried to write your story for you. Comment if you've ever felt like the invisible one. It started that morning, when I walked into the church and felt every eye turn on me like I was already a stranger. My steps faltered on the worn aisle runner, scuffed by generations of Sunday shoes. The chill of late autumn clung to my coat, and though candles flickered along the walls, I couldn't shake the cold gnawing inside me. Grandma Helen's voice ghosted in my head, that last memory before she was too weak to speak. "One day, your music will make people rise." She believed it. She always believed. I swallowed, clutching that memory like a talisman, even as whispers rippled from the pews. "She looks the same, still drifting," someone muttered. "Poor girl, can't even dress for her own grandmother's funeral," another added. The sharpness of their words cut as I passed row after row, every face a mirror of disapproval. My cousins Daniel and Melissa sat polished in their seats, Daniel's tie knotted too tight with importance, Melissa's hair drawn back in a professional knot. They looked like shining ornaments set against my plain gray suit. Their eyes swept over me dismissive, smug before turning back to each other, feeding off their own success. Margaret's voice rang out above the murmur, slicing the quiet. "Well, well," she said, lips curling. "Look who decided to show up, in that pathetic excuse for a suit. Did you find it at a thrift store?" Her laugh was brittle, carrying down the aisle. Figures. Always the dropout, always the embarrassment. Heat rose in my cheeks, but I forced myself forward, refusing to quicken my steps. I could feel the glee radiating off her as she twisted the knife deeper. Relatives leaned closer to each other, whispering like conspirators at a trial. Daniel, always eager to flaunt, cleared his throat loudly. "I just wrapped another case last week, $1 million settlement." His voice carried, the timing too perfect, it was meant for me, and everyone knew it. Melissa followed like clockwork. 2 successful surgeries in one day. Exhausting, but worth it. Their eyes flicked toward me, challenging me to measure up, and Margaret's smile widened, like a proud puppeteer. I slid into a seat near the front, near Grandma's picture framed in roses. Her eyes twinkled from the photograph as if she still held the secret of my worth. But Margaret wouldn't let silence reign for long. She leaned in, voice pitched just enough for everyone to hear. "Grandma wasted her love on you," she hissed, venom coiled in each syllable. "You'll die a nobody." The words rang in my skull, crueler than the toll of any funeral bell. A gasp or two broke from the pews, then silence smothered the room again. I couldn't move. My jaw clenched, my chest burned. I pressed my palms together so tight that my nails bit my skin, gripping until I could no longer feel my fingers. My eyes locked on Grandma's portrait, her gentle face, her faith etched into every line. Rachel grips her hands tight, eyes fixed on Grandma's portrait, swallowing her rage. As the hymns droned on, memories dragged me back to a darker house, a darker time. The pastor's voice faded to a dull hum, the organ notes thinning into background noise as my mind slid away from the pew and the coffin at the front of the church. It carried me back to a house I wished I had forgotten, but never could, a place where shadows seemed thicker, where the walls themselves held their breath. Margaret's voice had always been sharper than the crack of leather, sharper than the strap that hung from a hook in the kitchen. Even the smell of old wood and grease came back to me now, rising from the depths of memory. I saw myself small again, knees raw, hands red from scrubbing the kitchen floor. At 8 years old, I was already afraid of every footstep, already trained to make myself small, silent, invisible. "You missed a spot," her voice rang in my ears, echoing across decades. I remembered the way my tiny hands trembled over the bucket, how my heart raced each time the floor squeaked beneath her shoes. I dared not look up. The strap swayed behind her, a silent warning that my back knew too well. But I had made the mistake of lingering too long at the piano in the corner, pressing notes that reminded me of something better, something gentler, I thought maybe if I played softly she wouldn't notice. Foolish hope. What did I tell you about wasting time? The memory sharpened, brutal in its clarity. She yanked me by the arm, jerking me away from the bench. The sting of leather followed the quick, sharp burn across my skin. I didn't cry, not then, not with her eyes glaring down at me. Tears meant weakness. Tears meant another round. And then, like always, the door creaked and Grandma appeared. She didn't shout, didn't fight Margaret, but her presence alone shifted the air. I remembered her arms wrapping around me later, when Margaret's footsteps faded down the hall. "Don't let her words bury you," she whispered against my hair. "One day, people will rise when they hear your music." Her voice was a salve, but it couldn't erase the echo that came after, the one that gnawed deeper than any strap could reach. Margaret's face loomed above me in the kitchen, her lips curled, her breath hot with disdain. "No one will ever care about you." The words rattled through me even now, sitting in the pew with the hymns still droning. They clawed at my chest, trying to convince me she had been right all along. My eyes flicked to the coffin at the front, to the portrait framed in roses. Grandma's smile seemed to fight those words, to soften their grip. Back in the present, adult Rachel thinks, maybe she was right, or maybe she was wrong. The reception felt less like mourning and more like a stage where Margaret starred. The shift from the sanctuary to the reception hall was jarring. One moment dim wood, candlelight, the next harsh neon buzzing above long folding tables. Casserole dishes steamed, plastic cups of coffee sloshed, and voices rose in clusters. It smelled of onions, cheap cologne, and gossip. The sting of her words from earlier still pressed against my ribs. I carried them with me. Like an infection, Grandma wasted her love on you. You'll die a nobody. They hadn't left my head, not even through the hymns or the pastor's empty reassurances. And here in this bright room, Margaret's cruelty found a bigger audience. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his suit crisp, his smile rehearsed. "Closed another $1 million case last week," he announced, his tone booming just enough to cut through the hum of chatter. A couple of relatives clapped, others murmured with pride. He smirked as though the applause were his birthright. Not to be outdone, Melissa chimed in, crossing her arms with the precision of someone who had practiced authority. 2 surgeries in one day, one of them a child who walk again because of me. Heads turned, admiration written on their faces. The cousins shone, stars in Margaret's carefully curated constellation, and then came the pivot. Margaret's eyes glistened as though with grief, but her voice carried a sharper undercurrent. "Look at them," she said, motioning to Daniel and Melissa. "Successful, respected, making a difference." Her gaze fell on me like a hammer. "And what have you done, Rachel?" Every pair of eyes followed her lead. The coffee grew colder in my hand. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I wanted to speak, but words tangled in the web of humiliation she spun. "She's always been different," Margaret continued, sighing dramatically. Grandma was too soft on her, poured everything into a girl who gave nothing back. Rachel lived off pity, off scraps of kindness. She tilted her head toward me, a performance for the whole room. She never earned it. Laughter flickered from the corner of the table. A cousin I barely recognized whispered something about freeloaders, and more chuckles followed. My mother looked down at her cup, stirring without sipping, while my father shifted uncomfortably but stayed silent. Their silence stung more than the whispers. I watched Margaret's hand as she pressed it against her side, fingers curled around a sealed envelope. The way she held it close was telling, like a gambler protecting her last card. No one else seemed to notice, but my eyes locked on it, and suspicion lodged itself inside me. Margaret leaned back, letting the moment stretch. Her lips curled into the familiar smirk, the one I had feared since childhood. "Even your parents have nothing to brag about," she said, her voice loud enough for every table to hear. The air punched out of my lungs. Conversations hushed, as though everyone was waiting to see if I'd crack open, spill tears onto the plastic tablecloth. But I wouldn't give her that. My chair scraped the floor as I stood, legs trembling, face burning. I slipped outside, the cold night biting harder than the neon buzz. My eyes stung with tears I wouldn't shed inside. As I stepped onto the church's cracked sidewalk, voices from the open window reached me, low whispers, hissing like snakes. "Inheritance. Did Helen leave anything? Maybe Margaret has it. Maybe Rachel thinks she's entitled." Rachel slips outside, eyes stinging, overhearing whispers about inheritance. The night air was freezing, but the voice behind me froze me even more. My shoulders stiffened, the chill sinking deeper into my bones as I turned toward the sound. The yellow glow of the streetlight pooled across the cracked asphalt of the church parking lot, stretching long shadows between the cars. "Rachel?" The man's voice carried a mix of disbelief and recognition. I blinked, my eyes adjusting, and then I saw him leaning against a faded sedan plastered with old military decals. Jack Thompson, older, grayer, but unmistakable. His uniform days behind him, yet still standing with the posture of someone who had served too long to forget. I hesitated, unsure whether to welcome or retreat, but his expression softened. "It really is you," he said. "Petty Officer Walker, haven't heard that name in years." The title struck a chord I hadn't let myself hear in so long. My lips parted, but the words tangled. "Jack," I managed. "I didn't think anyone from the Navy still remembered me." His laugh was low, not mocking, but steady. "Hard to forget. You wrote that piece we played at Norfolk, didn't you? The anthem that had the whole base on its feet." He shook his head, eyes bright despite the dim light. "Hell, I can still hear it when I close my eyes." The memory hit me unexpectedly, the brass swelling, the uniforms gleaming under stadium lights, sailors rising as one. A time I had been proud, but never told my family. Never dared. Jack studied me, reading the silence I carried. "You've been hiding too long," he said quietly. "They don't know who you are, what you've done, but I do. And so did your grandmother." I frowned, the sting of the evening returning. "Margaret made sure no one ever knew," I whispered. "Yeah," he muttered, glancing toward the church doors as if the walls themselves had ears. "She's hiding more than just her tongue. That woman, she's keeping something that belongs to you. Helen left behind more than just memories." His gaze locked with mine, unflinching. "Don't let her bury it." My chest tightened. The sealed envelope I'd seen in Margaret's hand flashed in my mind. Suspicion churned into anger. "She has something," I murmured. "I knew it," Jack nodded slowly, as though confirming what he had long suspected. "You've been silent your whole life. But silence hasn't saved you, has it?" I wanted to argue, but the truth clawed at me. Silence had kept me small. Silence had let Margaret rewrite every version of my story. Jack stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold air. His voice lowered, firm and certain. "You don't have to take her crap anymore. Tomorrow we make them listen." The words settled over me like a command, not a suggestion. For the first time that night, I felt a flicker of defiance instead of shame. My fists unclenched, my spine straightened. Jack turned without waiting for my reply, moving toward his car. He popped the trunk open with a dull click. I peered over his shoulder, the lamplight spilling inside. Folded neatly was an old Navy uniform, its fabric worn but dignified, and resting atop it sheet music, yellowed at the edges, yet unmistakably mine. Jack opens his car trunk. Inside, an old Navy uniform and sheet music. Inside the envelope, Grandma's shaky handwriting glowed in the candlelight. My hands trembled as I unfolded the brittle paper, each crease threatening to tear under the weight of time. The flicker of the candle on the small altar cast shadows across the cramped prayer room, and for a moment it felt like Grandma herself was here, watching me, steadying me as she had so many nights before. The words wavered on the page, uneven letters carved with effort in her final days. "Rachel, you are my pride. Your music is your truth." My throat tightened. It wasn't just a letter. It was her last defiance against the chorus of voices that had called me worthless. Every syllable pushed back against years of Margaret's poison. I sat down hard on the wooden bench, the envelope crumpled in my fist. Tears blurred the lines as memories swarmed me at the piano, Grandma's hand resting lightly on my shoulder, her smile as I stumbled through clumsy notes. Night after night, she was the only one who cared to listen, the only one who whispered, "One day, your music will lift them." The warmth of her faith filled the cold little room, and I bent over the letter as though trying to crawl into it, to shield myself inside her love. "I won't die a nobody," I whispered to the paper, to the candle, to the ghost of her presence that seemed to press against me. The words came out broken, but they tasted like defiance. For the first time in years, my voice didn't sound like an apology. I traced her signature with the tip of my finger, memorizing each curve, willing myself to believe. If Margaret had wanted to erase me, she had failed. This letter proved I mattered, if only to the one person whose love had been real. A sound shifted in the hallway outside, a board creaking under a deliberate step. I froze, the the candle sputtering as if in warning. My first instinct was to hide the letter, but my hands hesitated, unwilling to let it out of sight. The door handle turned with agonizing slowness, and before I could move, the door opened. Margaret filled the doorway, her silhouette cutting across the dim light. Her eyes locked on the paper in my lap, and the flicker of triumph that had been warming me turned to ice. She stepped inside, closing the door with a soft click, her gaze never leaving the letter. My breath caught, my body rigid. The room shrank around us, the candle flame suddenly too small to hold back the darkness pressing in with her presence. Her lips curved into that familiar, venomous smile as she took a step closer, the heel of her shoe sharp against the wooden floor. Margaret's cold voice. Funny. I thought I burned that a long time ago. The door clicked shut, sealing me in with Margaret's venom. The muffled hum of voices from the reception faded instantly, leaving only the stale air of the side room pressing against my chest. A single lamp buzzed overhead, its weak yellow glow making her shadow stretch long and sharp across the floor. She stepped forward, calm and deliberate, the letter clutched in her hand like a blade. I thought I burned that a long time ago, she sneered, her voice echoing from the memory of the prayer room. She flicked the paper open, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. This scrap of pity means nothing in court. Sentimental drivel scribbled by a dying woman judges toss this kind of thing out in seconds. Her words dug deep, but the sight of her holding Grandma's words like a weapon cut worse. I rose from the bench, fists shaking. It wasn't yours to keep. It wasn't yours to hide. She tilted her head, lips twitching into a smirk. Hide? Number protect. From you. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Everyone knows you'd cling to this kind of nonsense. You were always greedy, Rachel. Always hungry for scraps of affection, scraps of approval. Now you want scraps of the estate too, don't you? My pulse hammered in my throat. You tormented me my whole life. Every word, every bruise, every time you told me I was nothing, you loved it. Don't stand here and call me greedy when all I ever wanted was peace. Her laugh was sharp, cold. Peace? No, darling, you wanted power. But you'll never have it. I control this family. I control what they think of you. And when the estate is settled, I'll control that too. She dangled the envelope between her fingers, the paper fragile, precious. Anger roared through me, a storm breaking past the years of silence. Grandma's love wasn't yours to erase. You couldn't take it then, and you can't take it now. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. Then, slowly, with theatrical cruelty, she gripped the envelope in both hands. The tearing sound ripped through the quiet like a scream. Half the paper dangled in her fingers, the other half fluttering in her fist. My heart stopped. She held it up, daring me, her smirk widening. Go on, she whispered. Stop me. Show them all what a desperate little nobody you are. Something snapped inside me. I lunged forward, seizing the envelope before she could shred it further. The paper crumpled against my chest, my breath ragged. I looked her straight in the eye, the words leaving my lips low and unshaken. You don't get to decide my worth anymore. By morning, Margaret's poison had spread like wildfire. The church hall smelled of stale coffee and reheated casseroles. The remnants of grief stretched thin over chatter that had nothing to do with mourning. Sunlight leaked through dusty windows, too bright for the exhaustion etched into every face. Plates clattered, chairs scraped, and voices wove together into a net of whispers that seemed to catch only one name, mine. I moved through the room, each step weighted with the echo of last night. The torn letter still burned in my pocket, half salvaged, half destroyed. Margaret's eyes had glimmered with triumph, as if shredding paper could shred the truth. But this morning, her weapons were different. They no longer cracked like leather, they slithered, invisible, through gossiping mouths. Did you hear? A cousin leaned close to another, their voices low, but not low enough. She got kicked out of the Navy, discharged in disgrace. My chest tightened. I wanted to step forward, to correct them, but my tongue felt heavy, anchored in silence. Daniel cleared his throat from the far end of the table, his voice cutting across the din like a judge delivering a verdict. Let's be honest. This isn't about Grandma. Rachel just wants whatever money she thinks she can scrape from the estate. His words drew nods, murmurs of agreement. He looked satisfied, as though winning another case in a courtroom built of family. Melissa, polished and sharp, folded her arms, her tone dripping with casual cruelty. If she cared for Grandma, she'd have achieved something by now. At least something worth mentioning. Her gaze flicked toward me, cold and assessing, before returning to her coffee, as if the matter were settled. I stood rooted, the room buzzing around me. Conversations shifted, but every thread circled back, weaving me into a caricature. The failure, the greedy one, the unwanted. I caught fragments like Barb's couldn't hack it in the Navy, never amounted to anything, living off pity. My breath quickened, but I forced myself to listen, even as shame dug its claws in deeper. And then I heard it, Margaret's voice, floating above the murmurs, sweet with false pity. "Poor thing," she said with a sigh, her tone carrying just enough to be heard by half the hall. "She can never keep a job, always struggling, always lost." The words sliced cleaner than any strap, sharper than last night's sneer. She had shifted from insult to slander, poisoning not just the room, but the story of my life. A chair scraped as I stumbled back, unable to breathe under the weight of her lies. The hall spun faces, whispers, smirks blurring into a storm. My chest heaved, air refusing to fill my lungs. I turned, pushing past the door, the cold air outside slapping me harder than her words. Rachel flees outside, breath ragged, wondering if silence has doomed her forever. I sat on the church steps, the cold seeping into my bones, and the past clawed back. The night pressed close, the porch lights throwing weak halos against the cracked concrete. Cigarette smoke drifted from a cluster of cousins lingering near the parking lot, their laughter jagged against the silence I tried to cling to. The chill didn't just come from the air, it seeped from memories that refused to stay buried. Margaret's voice rang as clear as if she stood beside me. "No one will ever care about you." The words had followed me from childhood, threaded through every humiliation, stitched into my skin. I pressed my palms against my knees, willing them away, but instead another memory rose, raw and sharp. I was 16 again, clutching a backpack stuffed with clothes and sheet music, my heart pounding as I crept down the staircase of her house. The moonlight had guided me to the door, the promise of escape burning brighter than the fear of the unknown, but the latch betrayed me, a sharp click in the silence. Her footsteps thundered behind me before I could run. Margaret's grip closed on my arm, nails digging into my skin as she yanked me back into the house. My bag fell open, spilling clothes, loose pages, dreams I had tried to pack. Her voice cracked like a whip in my ear. "You'll never survive without me. You'd starve in a week. You're nothing without this roof, nothing without me to remind you where you belong." She had dragged me back, slammed the door, and left me shaking in the dark. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her words pinning me down harder than her hand ever had. And now, sitting on these steps years later, the echo felt just as heavy. If I spoke now, if I tried to stand against her lies, wouldn't she twist it the same way? Wouldn't she convince them all that I was ungrateful, hysterical, a failure desperate for scraps of attention? Silence had kept me safe, even if it had cost me everything else. Maybe I had mistaken survival for strength. I pulled a scrap of paper from my pocket, the corner of an old church bulletin. My hands shook as I searched for a pen. The tip scratched against the page, and almost without thought, I began to jot down a melody, halting at first, then stronger, notes weaving into one another like a rope pulling me back from the edge. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was proof that beneath all the silence, something inside me still lived. The candlelight from the hall behind me flickered faintly through the glass door, and for a moment I imagined Grandma's hand resting on my shoulder, steady and warm. Her promise floated back. "Your music is your truth." I bent over the page, clutching the rough notes like a lifeline. My chest loosened, just slightly, enough to let in one breath that didn't taste like Margaret's venom. A voice cut in from the darkness. "They're not ready for what's coming." Jack's trunk creaked open, revealing an old Navy uniform and sheet music. The fabric looked worn but proud, folded with the precision of memory, while the yellowed pages on top seemed to hum with music even in the silence. Frost glittered on the windshield of his car, catching the glow of the flickering streetlight like shards of glass. The night felt brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest push. Jack reached inside, brushing the sheet music with reverence before turning to me. "It's time," he said, voice steady, no hesitation. "You need to let the band know. Tomorrow's service, this is where you reclaim yourself." His certainty pressed against my chest like a weight. My hands clenched and unclenched at my sides. "If I do this, they'll think I'm showing off," I muttered. "Margaret will twist it. She'll say I made the funeral about me." He shut the trunk with a heavy thud that echoed across the empty lot. His eyes narrowed, his words cutting straight through my doubt. This isn't vanity. It's justice. You've been silent long enough, Rachel. Silence is what gave her power. You don't owe them more of it. The cold seeped deeper, curling through my sleeves, but the tremor inside me wasn't from the air. I saw again the room filled with relatives who swallowed every word Margaret fed them, their judgment settling over me like dirt over a coffin. They wanted me buried before my body was even in the ground. I don't know if I'm strong enough, I whispered. Jack stepped closer, his voice low, certain, carrying the weight of someone who had stood at attention in storms far worse. Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about standing anyway. You already wrote the anthem that carried men through battles. Why not let it carry you now? His words struck deep, stirring something I'd tried to bury. I looked down at the sheet music he placed in my hands, the ink faded but alive. Grandma's words whispered through me, "Your music is your truth." I nodded, though my throat ached with fear. "All right," I said. "We'll do it." Jack's expression softened with something like pride. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notepad, already scrawled with numbers. "I'll make the call. But first, you need to sign here. Authorize it. The band won't move without your permission." The pen felt heavy in my fingers, my hand trembling as I hovered over the page. My pulse pounded in my ears, each second dragging. Then I pressed down, the ink scratching across the paper, my name etched like a declaration. The moment the pen lifted, I exhaled hard, my chest both lighter and heavier. The trap was set. Jack glanced at my signature, gave a sharp nod, then pulled his phone from his pocket. His thumb hovered for only a heartbeat before pressing the number. The screen glowed against his weathered face as he lifted it to his ear. Jack dials a number. It's on. Tomorrow morning. Sleep never came. Only Grandma's voice echoed in the dark. The parlor smelled of old wax and wood polish, a hush hanging heavy in the midnight air. Dim candles flickered along the walls, their light stretching long, uneasy shadows across the floorboards. I sat curled on a faded sofa, the torn half of Grandma's letter pressed against my palm. Your music is your truth. The words pulsed through me like a heartbeat, both a comfort and a challenge. My eyes burned, not from sleep, but from everything I'd swallowed all day, the slander, the whispers, the weight of Margaret's lies. Silence had been my shield, but tonight it felt like a cage closing tighter around me. The soft creak of a door broke the stillness. My mother, Emily, stepped into the room, her nightdress pale against the gloom. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders bent with decades of avoidance. She stopped when she saw me, her lips parting as if to speak, but only a whisper escaped. "Rachel." I couldn't stop the words that surged out, raw and jagged. "Why didn't you protect me?" My voice cracked, carrying all the years of bruises and silence that she had watched, and never stopped. Her eyes filled instantly, tears spilling as though they had been waiting all this time. "I was afraid," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Afraid of Margaret. Afraid of losing what little we had. I told myself you were strong enough to endure it, that it wouldn't break you." She pressed her hands to her face, sobbing. "But I was wrong. I failed you. I failed you so terribly." The sight twisted my chest, a mix of fury and pity. I wanted to hate her, but the years had already drained me of that energy. "I needed you," I whispered, and the words cracked something in her. She reached for me, her hands trembling as they hovered, hesitant, before clutching mine. "Please forgive me," she begged, her tears falling onto my knuckles. "I can't undo it, but I'll stand with you now if you let me." I squeezed my eyes shut, torn between longing and doubt. The letter burned in my pocket, Grandma's faith battling my mother's weakness. I couldn't be sure if this was redemption or desperation, but the admission shifted something. For the first time, she wasn't silent. Unseen in the corner, the air shifted. I felt it before I heard it, the almost inaudible shuffle of a shoe. Margaret's presence lurked in the doorway, cloaked in shadow, watching. When I dared glance, her silhouette was there, her lips curled in a smirk I knew too well. She thought this moment of pain proved her right, that I was cracked, broken, too fragile to fight. She vanished before my mother noticed, the echo of her quiet laugh lingering like smoke. I turned back to the candlelight, gripping the letter tighter, my pulse steadying. My voice came low, fierce, carrying words I'd never said aloud before. "Tomorrow, silence ends. The church bell tolled midnight like a summons to judgment. The memorial service was ended, but Margaret wasn't finished with me yet. The pastor's final words had faded, the hymn books closed, and for a moment the silence in the church felt like relief. Grandma's coffin lay at the altar, roses wilting against the polished wood, the weight of farewell pressing down on every bowed head. I thought foolishly that the torment was over, but Margaret rose from her pew like a queen reclaiming her throne. The creak of the bench announced her, sharp and jarring, and every eye turned. She smoothed her black dress, her face a mask of grief that quickly twisted into something colder. "Before we leave," she began, her voice carrying clear through the nave, "I think it's important to speak the truth." A murmur rippled, unsure, but no one interrupted. She thrived in that hesitation. Her eyes locked on me, and her lips curved. "Rachel has always been a disappointment. From the day she could walk, she was a burden on this family. Never ambitious, never reliable. A parasite we tolerated out of pity." The words fell like stones into the silence, each one heavier than the last. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, but most nodded, some whispering assent, their murmurs built into a tide. She never did much, always was the odd one out. My chest constricted as the air thickened with judgment. I stayed seated, knuckles white on my lap, but inside the old scars burned fresh. I could almost hear the strap again, her voice hissing in the kitchen, telling me no one would ever care. She was dragging me back into that prison even here, at Grandma's farewell. Margaret's voice grew sharper, feeding on the murmurs. She lived off Helen's kindness, sponging attention she never deserved, all while the rest of us worked, achieved, made our family proud. Look at Daniel, a lawyer respected by his peers. Look at Melissa, saving lives in the hospital. And then look, she gestured with a dismissive sweep, at Rachel. What has she ever done? The shame crawled up my throat, threatening to choke me. My mother wept quietly in her seat. My father stared at the floor. No one spoke against her. No one defended me. The silence was consent, and Margaret drank it in like wine. She stepped forward, her voice rising with the rhythm of a sermon. "Helen wasted her love on you," she shouted, her fingers stabbing the air toward me. "She poured her heart into a girl who gave nothing back. She thought you were special, but you'll die a nobody." The words cracked through the church like thunder. Gasps broke from the pews, the pastor shifting uneasily at the altar, but Margaret stood tall, flushed with the power of her performance. I sat frozen, the shame and fury warring inside me until I thought I would burst. And then it happened. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the church swung open, slamming against the walls. The solemn air shattered as brass instruments blared from outside, bold and bright, cutting through Margaret's venom like a blade of light through storm clouds. Doors swing open, brass instruments blare from outside. The sound was thunder, rolling through the church, silencing every tongue. The first blast of brass shook the stained glass in its frame, reverberating off the wooden beams above. Heads whipped toward the doorway as the double doors swung wide, spilling sunlight and a stream of uniforms into the sanctuary. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath, every face frozen between disbelief and awe. Jack had promised tomorrow, "They'll see who you are," but even I hadn't imagined this. The gleam of polished shoes struck the aisle in perfect unison, the Navy band filling the space with disciplined precision. Trumpets gleamed, trombones slid with liquid force, the drumline thudded like a heartbeat resurrected. The hush of grief had been swept away, replaced by sound that demanded reverence. At their head marched the commanding officer, his medals catching the fractured light streaming through the stained glass. He halted at the altar, turned sharply, and announced in a voice that cut clean through the stunned silence, "We are here to honor Petty Officer Rachel Walker." My name rang out, unshakable, undeniable. The same relatives who had whispered that I was nothing gasped, their mouths slack, their eyes wide. Margaret's face paled, her lips parting soundlessly. For once, she had no words. The conductor lifted his baton, and the musicians raised their instruments. Then it began my composition, born in quiet nights at a piano no one cared to hear, rising now in full force. The anthem thundered through the rafters, brass and percussion swelling, woodwinds weaving harmony like threads of fire. The melody was mine, every note etched with the pain of silence and the defiance of survival. I stood rooted, tears stinging as the sound wrapped around me. The music carried memories of long nights when Grandma sat listening, her hand warm on my shoulder, whispering, Your music will lift them one day. And here, in this very moment, they rose. The congregation stirred one by one, then all at once. People pushed to their feet, compelled not by obligation but by something deeper. Even Daniel, stiff with pride, rose to stand. Melissa followed, her hands clasped, eyes shining with something between shame and awe. My parents stood slowly, my mother's face streaked with tears. Even those who had mocked me earlier, who had swallowed Margaret's poison, found themselves standing. The music climbed higher, filling every crack of the church with light, with vindication. It was not my voice, but it was louder than anything I could have ever spoken. Each note tore down the lies brick by brick, leaving only truth in its wake. Margaret sat frozen, the only figure who resisted, her hands gripping the pew as though rising would betray her pride. Yet the anthem swelled around her, drowning her defiance, forcing her to hear what she had tried so hard to bury. The final chord rang out, reverberating into silence, a silence no longer heavy but electric. The crowd remained standing, their eyes on me, their respect undeniable. My heart pounded, but for once, it wasn't from fear, it was from being seen. Then came the click. A camera flash burst from the side aisle, followed by another and another. A local reporter had slipped in with the crowd, his lens capturing the moment as history in the making. Camera flashes from a local reporter, the moment captured forever. Margaret's face drained of color as the last note faded. The echoes of the anthem still trembled in the rafters, but the silence that followed was nothing like the one before. It was charged, alive, the kind of silence that waits for truth to burst through. Dozens of eyes shifted, no longer aimed at me but at her. The aunt who had ruled every room with her tongue now looked suddenly small, cornered, her lips pressed into a brittle line. Grandma's words whispered from the letter against my chest. Your music is your truth. And it was that truth, carried by brass and drum, that had cracked Margaret's mask. Is it true? Daniel's voice broke the stillness, sharp with suspicion. He turned toward Margaret, his jaw tight. Did you know? Did you keep this from us? Melissa followed, her polished composure unraveling into raw confusion. You said she failed. You said she never amounted to anything. But they just played her music. Her gaze flicked between me and Margaret, torn between shame and disbelief. Other relatives leaned in, murmurs rising like restless wind. One cousin hissed, "All this time?" Another said louder, "Why didn't you ever tell us she served?" Margaret lifted her chin, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Don't be ridiculous. It was exaggerated. A small piece at some local event, nothing worth mentioning. Jack stepped forward from the side aisle, his voice carrying with the authority of someone who had worn the uniform too long to be dismissed. That piece was performed at Norfolk, at the commissioning of a warship, and again in D.C. before senior officers. I was there. I watched her lead men twice her age with nothing but her music. The room erupted with gasps, whispers twisting into sharp questions. Margaret flinched as if each one was a blow. She looked around, searching for someone to back her, but all she found were frowning faces, the loyalty she had cultivated beginning to wither. And then my mother's sob cut through it all. Emily stood, her hands trembling, tears streaking her cheeks. She turned to me, her voice breaking. I should have defended you. I let her silence me just like she silenced you. Her eyes blazed with regret as she faced the room. My daughter was never a nobody. She is my pride, and I am ashamed it took me this long to say it. Her words hit harder than Margaret's insults ever had. The pews stirred, sympathy beginning to shift. For once, I didn't feel alone. Margaret's composure cracked. "Oh, please," she snapped, her voice shrill. "All of you, suddenly saints? That letter was nothing, I hid it for a reason." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, sharp and unfiltered. Gasps erupted across the sanctuary, loud and unanimous, like the sound of judgment itself. Faces turned, eyes wide, whispers rising into a tide of condemnation. Gasps erupt proof she secretly concealed Grandma's final words. The more she fought, the deeper she buried herself. The service had ended, but the church hallway pulsed with restless energy, a low tide of voices pressing in from every side. Relatives clustered in uneasy knots, their eyes darting between me and Margaret, waiting to see which story would stand. The scent of wilted flowers clung to the air, mingling with the sharp tang of coffee spilled on the linoleum floor. Margaret stood in the middle, her black dress rigid as armor, her face flushed with fury. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her voice rising above the murmurs. "This is all a sham! Helen always spoiled her, always gave her everything while the rest of us were left with scraps. It wasn't love, it was favoritism." Her words cracked, too sharp, too frantic. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The mask she had worn for decades was slipping, and everyone could see it. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his lawyer's poise faltering. "Aunt Margaret," he began, but she cut him off with a bitter laugh. "Don't defend her," she spat. "You all saw it." Helen doted on Rachel, treated her like some prodigy when she was nothing more than a dropout. "I deserved that love, not her. I was the one who stayed, who did the work, and what did I get? Nothing." Her jealousy spilled into the open, raw, and unfiltered. The same venom she'd whispered behind closed doors now poisoned the air in front of everyone. Melissa's face tightened, the admiration she'd always shown Margaret slipping into unease. Cousins exchanged wary glances, recoiling at the ugliness unraveling before them. My mother stepped forward, her frame small but her voice steady in a way I had never heard before. Tears still streaked her cheeks, but her chin lifted with resolve. "Enough," Emily said, her voice clear, firm. The hallway quieted at once. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Emily drew a breath that seemed to carry decades of silence, then released it with a strength that surprised even me. "You tormented my daughter. You broke her down, year after year, while I stood by in fear. No more. You will not twist this family against her any longer. Not here. Not now." The crowd shifted, something unseen snapping into place. Murmurs of agreement flickered. A cousin whispered, "She's right." Another nodded, eyes fixed on me instead of Margaret. Margaret's face twisted, fury and desperation colliding. She turned toward Daniel and Melissa, searching for validation. Tell them she's worthless, that she never deserved." But Daniel dropped his gaze, the practiced confidence of a lawyer dissolving into shame. Melissa looked away, her lips pressed tight, refusing to speak. The silence that followed was louder than any verdict. Margaret's breath came fast, her composure gone, her authority shattered. She spun on her heel, heels clattering against the tiles. Her voice rose one last time, shrill and broken. "You'll regret this! All of you!" She stormed toward the doors, but no footsteps followed. Not one relative moved to her side. The hallway parted around her, leaving only the sound of her retreating steps and the echo of a legacy crumbling. Margaret storms out. No one follows. When I stepped out of the church, the sun broke through the clouds. The storm of whispers, the venom of Margaret's words, the suffocating weight of years, all seemed to burn away under that sudden light. The air was crisp, washed clean, and the faint echoes of the Navy Band's anthem still lingered in the air like a blessing carried on the wind. People had spilled onto the steps, townsfolk and family alike, their faces transformed. Where once there had been smirks and sidelong glances, now there was silence laced with respect. My mother stood beside me, her hand trembling as it slipped into mine. She squeezed tightly, as if she were afraid I might vanish if she let go. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but her voice carried no weakness, only remorse. "I should have protected you," she whispered, her words breaking against the weight of her regret. Then she drew a breath, steadier, stronger. "But I'm proud of you now." The ache in my chest softened, not healed but eased. I turned to her, the years of silence between us bridged by those words. For the first time, she wasn't avoiding the truth, she was standing with me inside it. Jack lingered a step away, his shoulders squared as if he still carried the uniform folded in his trunk. His eyes met mine, steady and knowing. "You did it," he said simply. No embellishment, no fanfare, just respect. He tipped his head, a soldier's nod, before turning to leave, blending into the crowd that now saw me differently. I scanned the faces before me, the cousins who had mocked me, the relatives who had whispered Margaret's lies. None spoke now. Their silence was no longer condemning but reverent, as though the music had shaken something loose inside them that words never could. Townsfolk stood straighter, their gazes softer, carrying the weight of recognition. I lifted my eyes to the portrait of Grandma still framed in roses at the top of the steps, the petals trembling in the breeze. My lips moved with a whisper only my heart could hear. They finally heard it. The sunlight caught the stained glass behind me, casting color across the stone, and in that moment it felt as if she were there, smiling, her promise fulfilled. The band's last notes faded into the open air, leaving behind not emptiness, but clarity. I took a breath that felt like the first in years and stepped down the church steps, each stride lighter than the last. Faces parted, the crowd giving way, not out of pity, but out of respect. Fade out with Rachel walking into the sunlight, justice fulfilled. The anthem that once silenced Rachel's voice became the weapon that shattered Margaret's lies, leaving a family that had once scorned her forced to confront the truth. Justice came late, but it arrived with the weight of music that could no longer be ignored. Like a final chord ringing through an empty hall, it proved that courage is the only antidote to cruelty, and that when injustice is met head-on, it eventually collapses under its own weight. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved you, please like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts. Type 1 if you felt the same pain and triumph, or 2 if you believe the ending could have struck even harder.